Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective. Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered. A big thanks to everybody that called in last week to speak to Rob and I. We had a fantastic time on the radio, Rob.
Mate, I enjoyed it immensely. It was good to be, amongst everybody there, and we raised some good money. Look, people can still log on and donate, I think, for another week or so that would be really, really good.
Yeah, for a few more weeks now. So 3cr.org.au. Go there, click on the link, donate. You can call through to the radio station. They'll take your credit card over the phone. If you make a donation between now and the 30th of June, you'll get a tax deduction. So be sure to get on there and support 3CR because they host such wonderful shows as Palestine Remembered. Now, Rob, today we've got one of our longtime friends, Ronnie Barkan, joining us. He's a BDS anti-apartheid activist. He's an anti-Zionist. He's an Israeli dissident. He is one of our fantastic, fantastic Jewish brothers and sisters. And he's in the UK today.
What a resume. Fantastic. Welcome, Ronnie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Ronnie, it's fantastic that you're joining us today because you've just tasted a little bit of freedom.
Yep. It's much nicer to be outside of Her Majesty's prison than, in there. Not as glamorous and royal as it sounds.
Now, many people talk the talk, but not many people walk the walk. And we don't want to say too much about your case because the reality is you've been involved in some direct action with Palestine Action, and people will put a link to it in the podcast and you can look them up on Twitter and Facebook. But Palestine Action is a group of activists, anti-apartheid activists that are targeting Elbit weapons factories in the United Kingdom. And they've had some amazing success with their actions. In fact, the UK head office, as I understand it, closed this week, Ronnie.
Yeah, that is correct.
They've been fantastic in their work. And as we know, Elbit proudly boasts that their weapons are battle tested. And what they mean by that is that they've managed to use this weaponry and test it on humans. And those humans are the Palestinians, whether they be in Gaza, West Bank or East Jerusalem. So congratulations on that work, direct action. All power to you. Now, Ronnie, you spent a few nights as Her Majesty's guest.
Yeah, I spent a month. There was an action a month ago and I spent a month there. And now two of us who are not UK citizens were on remand for a month, and now all are out on bail.
That's good that you're out on bail, but your trial isn't until next year. But all power will be following closely, brother, and wishing you every very best. Now, the reality...
Yeah, Ronnie's being cagey because he has to be. He can't, obviously talk too much, but he is basically on bail. He has strict bail conditions. He actually has an ankle bracelet on as well. He won't be going to court until April next year. He's not allowed to leave the country. He has to sign into the local police station on a Saturday and a Sunday. And that just shows the seriousness of it. I know you can't say anything, but you can confirm that's happened. And your work has been superb.
Well done. All power to you, brother. Another election, the fifth election. It's about the only place that you keep having elections. But this election in particular, Israelis and Zionists have been proudly boasting that, it's a democracy because we've got Arabs as members of the ruling party. Mm-hmm. And they've proudly boasted that thing, Palestinians have said, every resistance movement and every anti-occupation movement had its Uncle Toms. This coalition has collapsed, and it's collapsed because they couldn't pass a very significant law that they've been renewing for a number of years. Why don't you tell us about that?
I have been following from up close the internal bickering among Zionists and the Knesset and anyone else who is there who doesn't identify Zionist but still participate in the game, because I think it is of no importance. At least I see it as I call it, the least important event of the year. or the upcoming elections. Also, I was technically prohibited from doing that while in prison. But I will simply say that unlike the case of South African apartheid, which was literally a case of black and white, the Zionist form of apartheid, which started also in 1948, they have created something. They have created something that is much more a more sophisticated form of apartheid. Which there is one layer which is clearly about the superhumans, super beings controlling the subhumans, the Übermenschen controlling the Untermenschen, and this is the entire framework of the foundation of the State of Israel. Its laws, its practices, everything that was happening there from 48 to this day is about that, what I just said a moment ago, while at the same time they have also managed to create this another layer, skin deep layer, which gives the facade of democracy, the facade of liberalism, the facade as if there is something that may be regarded as that would give it some form of legitimacy in the eyes of the world. And they have been very successful at that. So you mentioned that yes, indeed, there is yet another election. And they would even boast about, look how democratic we are. But actually, the so-called Jewish and Democratic State of Israel, which I would say it is supremacist and apartheid, not Jewish and democratic. It's, again, a misuse of terms. The Jewish and Democratic State of Israel is just as democratic or anti-democratic as the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea, which also has democratic in its name. But no one in their right mind would treat North Korea as a democracy. Somehow, most of the world still regards that quote-unquote Jewish and Democratic State as either Jewish or democratic, and it's neither. And this is what people have to understand, that from its very foundation, it is based on the exact opposite of democratic values, meaning the exact opposite of the values of equality, multiculturalism, the rights of minorities. Actually, there are 20 million people who are under the direct influence of the Zionist race state. 9 million of them, 7 million of them or so are the privileged group that I belong to. The other 12 to 13 million are Palestinians who are subjugated and terrorized in every possible way. 6 million of them, half of them, are actually even denied the right to come back home since the very foundation of the State of Israel. They have been expelled from them and are in forced exile for the past 7 decades, only to maintain that pretense of what they call Jewish democracy. Okay, so 20 million people are subjugated or under the auspices of the Zionist race state. 9 million of them have the right to vote. That includes the privileged group, plus those who are second-class citizens, Palestinians who are citizens of 48 of the State of Israel, and their vote means absolutely nothing by law, and I can explain that. And among those 20 million people affected, 9 million can vote, 0 of them are allowed to transform that place into a democracy.
Absolutely. The reality of this coalition and the Knesset as it is today, 120 seats, Benjamin Netanyahu in opposition, trying to get back in, Naftali Bennett, and was not able to pass the West Bank Security Bill. And the West Bank Security Bill extends Israeli civil law to settlers in occupied West Bank. And then that creates the apartheid situation where a resident of the West Bank, be a Palestinian, they get treated under military law, but a settler built on in a settlement built on stolen Palestinian land next door gets Israeli civil law. So they weren't able to pass that. By dissolving parliament, what happens is that this bill, the emergency West Bank security bill, gets extended for 3 months post the next government being sworn in. And so the law just stays in place, entrenching apartheid a little bit further.
I should mention that Naftali Bennett has been actually quite consistent about that. He, when he was not that well known, he was promoting what he called the annexation plan. And the annexation plan pretty much says most of the Zionist settlers live in what is regarded as Area C of the West Bank, while only a small number of Palestinians live there, and Israel should simply annex Area C. And then he carries on, and I can share with you in the audience a video where he explains that from well over 10 years ago. And he explains that, yes, obviously the world will not like that we are annexing Area C, but then again, they don't like many things that we do, so why should we care about that? Obviously, those who try to sell to the world that Israel is a thriving democracy or a flawed democracy or some sort of democracy, those who try to claim that there is some form of liberalism, that Israel is concerned to a certain degree with human rights, etc., they have issues with Bennett's arguments, because obviously that throws international law and all kinds of agreed conventions out the window. So and this is always the friction that you will see between the right and the so-called left in Israel, where the right wing is much more honest about the racism. They are racist and proud of it, like Bennett and many others, while the so-called left, and there are no Zionist leftists, it is impossible to be Zionist and humanist, Zionist and leftist, etc. Those so-called left, they try all the time to be Zionist and humanist, try to speak the human rights discourse in order to cover up, to sugarcoat their racism and supremacy. And Bennett is actually too honest, to be fair. He's too honest for them, and that doesn't sit well with them.
His views are reflective of the overwhelming majority of the Knesset, as if there is a left in the Knesset in Israel. The reality is there's a choice between very, 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 very far right and very, very, very right. There is no left.
Exactly. Basically, the only concept of democracy among Israeli society, and even with the terminology, whenever we say Israeli society in Israel, we never count the 20% who are not among the privileged group, the 20% who are Palestinian citizens of 48. Even just when they say the people or Israelis, unless they explicitly say in a poll or in an article that this includes all citizens of the state of Israel, when we say Israeli, we only count the privileged group because they're the only one who matter. So democracy, the term democracy, as it is used in Israel, is basically the rule of the majority. So obviously, when they control who are the people that are allowed to vote, like I said, only 9 million of the 20 million are actually allowed to vote. And among them, 1.5 million, their vote means absolutely nothing by law. I'll explain in a second. Then obviously, if they control who can vote, then they can feel that they are the democracy. They created an artificial, quote unquote, Jewish democracy by basically limiting Palestinians from expressing their view, or limiting them from even living on their land. Now, I should mention that in the law, basic law, the Knesset, Article 7a, says that a party cannot run for elections if it negates Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, or in other words, as I said before, if it negates Israel as an apartheid supremacist state, because these are euphemisms. Jewish and democratic are euphemisms to supremacist and apartheid. And the amendment to the law also says that even no one can run for elections, not only the party platform, but also an individual may not run to election if they negate Israel as a Jewish democratic state, even if they simply express themselves, let's say, against that concept, even on, I don't know, on Facebook. That means that every single member of Knesset explicitly or implicitly acknowledges that. If there would be enough of them who explicitly deny Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, they will simply be barred from participating in the elections, in the running for elections. So the fact that they are not barred should simply tell you that they're not even bothering to challenge that concept. And that is the game that is being played. Every single member of Knesset, including those who are not necessarily Zionist, the Palestinian members of Knesset, are at best fig leaves for a criminal and barbaric apartheid regime, whose parliament, the Knesset, is basically the main vehicle. There are two main vehicles of apartheid. One is the Knesset, the legislating body. The other is the Supreme Court, which basically legitimizes all the wrongdoings. And that's the only role of these bodies, to legislate the supremacist character and practice of the state and to legitimize it. And they've been doing it consistently.
I think that's one of the points that's never discussed, is the fact that there are Palestinian politicians, but every so often they do push back, and then the whole party says that they should be arrested, they should be kicked out, they shouldn't be a politician. So they really are strung where they can't say a lot. And as you said, they're tokens, they're fig leaves, and unfortunately that doesn't get out enough. So everybody thinks that they're
I think
exactly. Personally,
there's a correlation. Sorry, Ronnie. And currently in Australia, we have a senator. She's an Indigenous activist, comes from a long line and a very powerful line of Indigenous activists. And she's a senator, and she won't stand with the Australian flag behind her. When the Australian flag has the Southern Cross as well as the Union Jack. Euphemistically and colloquially called the Union Jack is called the butcher's apron, because there's so much blood on the Union Jack. And she won't stand in front of it. She said, why would I stand in front of it? It's not my flag. I'm an Indigenous person. You came here. We never invited you. We never gave you treaty. You never asked us to come. You've never made peace with us. We're still incarcerated in greater numbers, demonized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why would I legitimize it? And she was challenged. Well, you're a senator. You're a member of parliament. You had to swear allegiance to the Queen and to the Constitution, and you've done that. And so it's just a lie. She said, well, the reality is, it was a conversation I had to have with my family to whether or not we could do this and what benefit would we have in participating, and what could I change from within as opposed to from without. And the reality, as you said, there's 1.5 million Palestinians that get to vote. The conditions under which they might join the Knesset demand that they recognize Jewish and democratic. The nation state law that Benjamin Netanyahu passed in 2018 is very explicit that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people and the Jewish people only. People on my Twitter feed and Facebook saying, but what about the Israeli Supreme Court? There's a judge there who's an Arab, and there's Arab parties in the government, and Arabs head of hospitals. So look, people have got to live. People will participate in the best way they can, but without equality, under law, a nation for all its peoples, irrespective of their beliefs, what you have in that country is a Jewish supremacist state, a racist state, an apartheid state.
So I will only challenge the very last thing about the term Jewish supremacist. Everything else that you said, I fully agree with. The term Jewish supremacist is misleading and even, I would say, dangerous. And it is promoted by some organizations like B'Tselem and others. And I'll explain why. You see, in Australia, in the US, in Canada, etc., places that were built on white supremacist ideals and practices, at some point they managed to, I wouldn't say abolish that, but at least make it illegal. And there is some basis that nowadays we can build upon. Okay, the US has a constitution, not the best, but they do have a constitution. Same goes for Canada. It's not that slavery has been abolished in the US. It is being transformed by legal means now into the prison industrial complex. But there is some basis, and in Black Lives Matter, we all know about that. I mean, the white supremacist character has not been totally dissolved. It has not become what it should be. But there is some basis that we can build upon. Same goes for Canada, and same applies to Australia, and I have much respect to that senator who would not stand by the flag and challenges that in one way or another. And I don't know the details exactly, but I understand that this challenging of that is important in order to advance in the right direction. I was very impressed by the land recognition that is being carried out in Canada, for example. When I was speaking there, it was really important for me, and that was the most important part of my talk as far as I was concerned. The land recognition, and I went on and on about how I wish that one day we will arrive at that point in Palestine. We are far away from that. The Zionist race state, which is a race state, not Jewish supremacist state, it is a race state, it is a white supremacist state. And we have to understand whiteness as a construct. It is not necessarily about skin color, it is about the perception that there are some people who are superior to others, and only they deserve rights. And I'll elaborate about that in a second, but this is why I challenge the very term Jewish supremacist, because Jewish supremacist implies that there is something inherently supremacist about Judaism. And Judaism is yet another religion. I don't have much for or against that religion. I couldn't care less about these things, but I do care about the false conflation between Judaism, which is a religion, and criminal supremacist Zionism. Zionism is supremacist in its very nature, and it uses and abuses Judaism to gain legitimacy, and it does kind of take some of the supremacist, or what can maybe be regarded as supremacist elements within Judaism to make its case. So I will just challenge that terminology.
No, you're 100% right, Ronnie.
Great, I'm happy that we agree.
Zionism has bastardized that element to
absolutely,
claim it. And we as activists need to bring Judaism away from
exactly
to Zionism.
Exactly. So I oppose any and all conflation between criminal supremacist Zionism and Judaism, which is a religion. And basically saying, and this is what pretty much all the Zionists are saying, if you're critical of the Zionist race state, you must be somehow critical of Jews. The logic of that also says that all Jews, doesn't matter by what character, like religious or otherwise, all Jews are inherently, because of their Jewishness, whatever that means, they must be supportive of the Zionist race state, the criminal supremacist race state. And it is just like saying that all Muslims are terrorists.
Yep.
Okay.
No question.
It's like it's racist in its very nature to claim something like that. Okay. 100%. So we agree on that.
100%.
Now I say that the Zionist race state was founded as a white supremacist state. It was founded on the exact same ideals as the Ku Klux Klan, but the Ku Klux Klan is no longer legal in the US. It was quite mainstream. We know that. It is no longer legal. It is still there, and obviously the idea behind it is still alive. But there is, as mentioned before, something to build that we can build upon, some basis of equality, of multiculturalism, etc. The exact opposite applies to the Zionist race state. It is founded as a white supremacist state. It is founded on the exact same principles of the KKK, and that's where it stands. This is exactly everything that we're talking about, and obviously there's nothing legitimate about that. It cannot be legitimate. The only way for the Zionist race state to become, the only way for the state of Israel to become a legitimate entity is if and only if it respects the rights of all 20 million people, sons and daughters of that land. And I count into that figure also those who are currently the privileged, the supremacist. Yes, I mean, they are all part of that territory by now. And, I'm not one of those who support yet another ethnic cleansing in order to fix the previous one. Rather, I support something that is way more radical. I support equality. And this is the most radical you can get in Israel.
The most radical you can get, equality. It's very, very sad. One of the things that Israel has done, Zionism has done now, they ratcheted up the criminality of advocacy for Palestine. Called the 6 NGOs in Palestine terrorist organizations. They've sent out documentation to the funders throughout the EU and North America. And everybody's reported back, this is below the standard of proof that you should be using to convict somebody of terrorism, but cutting off funding to those places, instilling the IHRA everywhere. And we know 8 of 11 examples there are specific around talking about conflation between Israel and Judaism, and therefore making the point that you were just making. The criminalizing activism. We just saw Mohammed al-Kurd in Berlin be disinvited to go to the Institute. What's your sense on that? How do we push back?
So I'll leave for a moment their redefinition of terrorism to apply to such Palestinian NGOs, and deal with the other element, which is way easier, the IHRA definition, what's called the working definition for anti-Semitism. That working definition, first of all, it's a whole jumble of words that doesn't make any sense, and it is a cyclical argument that they use there, etc. But most importantly, two things for the audience to remember. First of all, the person who drafted that so-called working definition, he stepped back and he said at some point, no, this is being used in the wrong way. I mean, I didn't intend for it to be used in that way. Secondly, there is the definition, which is, like I said, it doesn't hold water. It's like, from the legal perspective, it means absolutely nothing because it is a cyclical definition. Secondly, then there is a whole list of examples which are used in a sinister way as part of the definition, even though the examples are meant to be just examples. So, and also these examples are the ones that conflate criticism of Zionism with criticism of Jews. So I'll, taking the whole package, because this is how it is being used to silence the voices. Anyone who is anti-Zionist is being tagged as anti-Semitic in one way or another. I'll say two simple things. One, the IHRA definition itself is anti-Semitic. Secondly, it is anti-Palestinian. Okay, in its very nature. It is anti-Semitic because of what I said before. Any conflation of Judaism and Zionism is anti-Semitic. Anytime that you treat Jews as a monolithic group and say that simply because of their Jewishness, they are Zionist, meaning white supremacists, actually, that's as racist as it gets. You cannot be more anti-Semitic than saying all Jews are criminal supremacists, vile creatures. That's exactly what they say. This is what the IHRA definition says. Secondly, it is anti-Palestinian because it claims that any statement like Free Palestine is somehow hate speech, a form of hate speech. So it should be illegitimate to say Free Palestine. Just think about that. So yeah, I mean, the IHRA definition, anyone who treats it seriously is a joke. I seriously, I cannot treat it seriously, and I cannot regard anyone who treats it seriously in a serious manner. Okay, it doesn't matter who it is. I'm here in the UK, for example. Corbyn is a wonderful person. I have so much respect for him, but we also have to acknowledge that Corbyn dug his own grave the moment that he chose the apologetic tone whenever he was falsely accused of anti-Semitism. And try to convince the world that it didn't reject that whole notion, as if himself and others demanding equality, multiculturalism, and all of that, demanding freedom, equality, and justice in Palestine, that is not anti-Semitic. It cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. Yes, it is anti-Zionist, of course. If you're humanist, you're anti-Zionist.
Yeah.
In some cases, you have to choose: are you a fascist or anti-fascist? Are you a Zionist or a humanist? There's no other option here. I'm sorry to say this. If anyone thinks that there is a middle ground, there isn't. In some cases, there isn't. Yeah. So you have to make a choice. And the Zionists are obviously very concerned about that. About the other question, I'll just simply say that yes, Israel has been trying and quite successfully doing so to accuse different organizations and individuals of terrorism. The U.S. has learned, by the way, from Israel the practice in some cases. It doesn't matter. I mean, they've been colluding about that all, for a long time. But they have created new legal categories. For example, illegal combatants. If you're familiar with that, Israel is using that, and the U.S. was using that against people like in Guantanamo and other places in order to shield them from in order to shield them from international law, they created another legal category, and they've been very good at that. So, but when they use the term terrorism, first of all, obviously, people who stand for human rights, etc., it's kind of outrageous that they would be called terrorists. But the former Minister of Justice, Ayala Chaked, she also said very clearly that she regards the BDS campaign as terrorism, a new form of terrorism, and this is what they are concerned about. Obviously, this is a form of propaganda, but on her behalf. But again, let's look at that carefully. We are BDS activists. What does BDS stands for? BDS stands for equality, freedom, and justice. BDS stands for 3 fundamental rights that are all protected by international law and human rights conventions, right? Equality for Palestinians who are currently second-class citizens, freedom from that harsh, brutal military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and finally, the rights of the refugees, 6 million people or more who are denied the right to come back home ever since the foundation of the Zionist race state. And that's their right in the law. So, again, I cannot treat it seriously when Israel calls us or such Palestinian NGOs as terrorists. Obviously, it doesn't mean that we should take it lightly because terrorism is a very serious charge, and we should fight that, of course. But the fact that they are able to make such claims shouldn't worry us. I think it should urge people to, like I said, that at some point you have to choose whether you're a fascist or anti-fascist. Okay, some people would rather sit on the fence and wait, and actually Israel is making it very difficult for people to sit on the fence any longer, and that's not necessarily a bad thing as far as I'm concerned.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. Ronnie, that's fantastic. I like the way we've got to wrap it up now, but it's a great way to finish. You can either be a fascist or an
I think it's pretty
anti-fascist.
safe to say that Ronnie doesn't sit on the fence.
Ronnie's not a fence sitter, and Ronnie actually is at the forefront. Ronnie Barkan, activist, anti-apartheid, anti-Zionist, Israeli dissident. Thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with your case.
Thank you. And when Palestine is free also, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Great to speak to you again, brother. Listeners, thanks for tuning in to Palestine Remembered. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and remember, there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.